My name is Charlotte Ellison, and I live in a small red brick house on Cedar Court, tucked near the Old River Bend in Cincinnati, Ohio. It isn't a mansion or anything fancy, but it's mine. I worked for 5 long years to make it that way. When the story I'm about to tell began, the house was full of noise, voices raised, plates clattering, and the old ceiling fan spinning like it was trying to escape. It was a Friday night. My mother, Judith, was pacing the kitchen, her voice sharp and cold. My father, Carl, sat at the table, his fingers drumming against the wood, waiting for his moment to speak. My sister, Tessa, leaned against the counter with that smug look she had worn since she was 15, the look that said she was always right and everyone else was ridiculous. "You're responsible for her wedding, Charlotte," my father finally shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "Either contribute to this family or disappear forever." The words hit me like stones. My sister grinned and said, "Be ashamed. You're older. You're supposed to set an example." I took a deep breath. I could smell the burnt coffee on the counter, the lemon cleaner I had bought myself, the faint scent of rain through the cracked window. For years, I had swallowed my anger, paid the bills, cleaned their messes, kept peace in a house that was slowly becoming a battlefield. But that night, something inside me shifted. I stood up quietly. The chair scraped the floor, a small sound that silenced the room. My voice didn't tremble. "You all have one day to get out," I said. For a moment, they just stared at me. Judith blinked, confused. Carl looked ready to laugh, as if I'd just made a bad joke. Tessa scoffed. But I didn't move. I stood there, calm as a mountain, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. They didn't know. None of them truly knew that this house, this modest, 2-bedroom place with the crooked shutters and the white fence, was mine. For years, they thought they owned it, that I was just another daughter staying under their roof. But every single month, it was my money that went into those payments. $1,650, like clockwork. Not once had they asked where the money came from. They thought I was just helping out. 5 years ago, when I had moved back home after a bad breakup in Philadelphia, the lender had put the house in my parents' names temporarily, a legal trick to make the mortgage easier for approval. But I was the one making every payment. The contract was clear. After 60 months, the deed would automatically transfer to me. I had paid every cent, every dollar, and I kept every receipt. So, when they demanded I pay for Tessa's wedding, a wedding that was already draining my parents' savings and their sanity, I realized just how blind they had become to the truth. They thought I owed them. They thought I lived here out of pity or guilt. But I was the one who had carried this house on my back. "Charlotte, don't be dramatic," Judith said finally, forcing a laugh. "You can't just kick your family out. This is our home." I looked at her, really looked at her. Her lipstick was smudged from shouting, and her hand trembled slightly as she tried to light a cigarette she wasn't supposed to smoke indoors. "It was," I said quietly, "but not anymore." Carl stood up, his face red. "You think you're better than us now? You think because you make a few dollars designing logos, you can talk to me like that?" I met his eyes. "I think because I paid for this roof, I get to decide who lives under it." The room went silent again. I walked to the counter, picked up my mug, and poured out the cold coffee. My hands didn't shake. The house seemed to breathe with me. The walls that I had painted myself, the window trim I'd sanded and refinished on weekends, the kitchen light fixture I bought for $240 on sale from a store in Columbus. Every corner of this place was built with my effort and my money. I went to my room that night and locked the door. Through the thin walls, I could hear them whispering. Tessa cried a little. Judith's voice was low, pleading. Carl kept saying, "She won't go through with it." I stared at the ceiling until midnight and listened to the rain tapping the roof that I had paid to repair. $2,800, exactly, from the savings account I opened when I was 21. Sleep didn't come easily. I thought about how strange it was that families could twist love into chains. For years, I had told myself that family meant sacrifice, that it was normal for them to take while I gave. But that night I realized something else, that love without respect is just control in disguise. In the morning, sunlight spilled across my floor. I made myself coffee, black and strong, and sat by the window. Outside, the street was quiet. The maple tree across the road had turned gold overnight, its leaves catching the wind like soft coins. I could hear the hum of a distant lawnmower and the bark of the neighbor's dog. For the first time in months, I felt peace. When my parents came into the kitchen, they didn't shout. They looked tired. Judith had packed a small bag, though she didn't mention it. Carl avoided my eyes. Tessa's phone was in her hand, her wedding group chat still open, the picture of a dress that cost nearly $5,000 glowing on the screen. "I'll call Matthew," I said. "Who's Matthew?" Tessa asked. "My attorney." Carl exhaled through his nose. "You're really doing this?" "Yes," I said. "The papers will arrive today. The deed is officially transferring into my name. You'll have 24 hours to make plans. I won't stop you from taking what's yours. But the house stays with me." Tessa glared at me. "You're heartless." "No," I said softly. "I'm finally tired." Judith reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just finished. That afternoon, I went to my job at the design studio downtown. My coworker Carmen asked if I was okay. I told her everything, in a quiet voice between drafts and coffee breaks. She listened, then said, "You did what most people never find the courage to do, Charlotte. You took your life back." When I drove home that evening, the house glowed in the setting sun, the brick shining warm and orange, the same color it had when I first saw it 5 years ago. I parked, sat in the car for a while, and thought about what came next. I wasn't sure yet, but I knew I wouldn't live in someone else's shadow anymore. That night, when I walked through the front door, I whispered to myself, "This is mine." And for the first time, the house seemed to whisper back, not in noise, but in stillness. In peace. The morning after everything unraveled, I woke to a strange quiet. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like it was holding its breath. The air was still, soft light spreading through the blinds, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound. My head was heavy from a restless night, but my mind was sharp. I knew what I had to do. I showered, dressed in my gray blazer, and drove downtown to meet Matthew Price, my attorney. Matthew had handled my contract 5 years earlier, when I first bought the house. Back then, I was nervous, inexperienced, and eager to please. He had told me that the title arrangement, placing the house temporarily in my parents' names to help secure the mortgage, was safe, provided I made every payment. After 60 months, he had said, the property becomes fully yours, Charlotte. Just don't miss a single one. I hadn't. Matthew's office was on Vine Street, above a coffee shop with green awnings and the faint smell of cinnamon. As I waited for him, my friend Carmen joined me. She had heard everything, the shouting, the ultimatum, the way I had told my family to leave. Carmen had been my coworker at the design studio in downtown Cincinnati for 3 years. She was the kind of person who carried quiet strength, with hands that always smelled faintly of paint and lavender lotion. "You're doing the right thing," she said, squeezing my hand. "It's about time someone saw you for what you've done." I nodded but didn't answer. The truth was, I felt both powerful and empty. Standing up for myself had been liberating, but it also left me with a strange ache of finality, the feeling that a chapter of my life had closed for good. When Matthew arrived, he looked exactly as he had 5 years ago. Crisp white shirt, thin gold watch, and a habit of tapping his pen against his notebook while he spoke. He greeted me warmly and asked for the paperwork. I handed over a folder thick with documents, every bank statement, every transfer receipt, the emails from the mortgage lender in Columbus, even a copy of the contract itself. He flipped through the pages methodically, his brow lifting every so often. "You kept everything," he said, impressed. "I had a feeling I might need it one day." He smiled faintly. Smart woman. For nearly an hour, Matthew reviewed every line of the contract. I sipped my coffee, a $4 medium roast, and waited. The air in the cafe buzzed with soft conversations, and somewhere behind us, someone dropped a spoon. Carmen sat beside me, scrolling idly through her phone, pretending to be calm. Finally, Matthew set the papers down and leaned back. "It's airtight," he said. "The agreement clearly states that upon completion of 60 consecutive monthly payments, full ownership transfers to you, Ms. Ellison. The deed should already be reissued in your name. I can have the county clerk confirm it by the end of the day." My shoulders sagged with relief. "So, there's no legal way for them to contest it?" "None," he said. "They were co-signers, not payers. The property is legally and financially yours. In fact, you could file for an injunction if they refuse to leave." I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Carmen smiled, proud. "I told you," she whispered. Matthew printed out a few forms, signing where necessary, then handed me a copy of the updated deed that had been processed last month. My name, Charlotte Ellison, is printed clearly in bold letters. Seeing it there, official and permanent, felt like reclaiming a part of myself I'd given away long ago. "Congratulations," Matthew said. "You're a homeowner in every sense now." On the walk back to my car, the autumn wind lifted the ends of my hair. The trees along the street were burning red and gold, their leaves swirling against the sidewalks. It felt like the world had decided to match my mood, ending, clearing, changing. I bought another coffee on the way home and left a $2 tip. Small gestures mattered. For years, I couldn't afford even that. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked older than I remembered, not in a bad way, just real. The lines under my eyes told stories of long nights, hard work, and quiet endurance. And yet, there was something new in my gaze. Certainty. When I reached home, I parked in the driveway and sat there for a while. The house looked different now, not smaller, not larger, just more mine. Every window, every shingle, every dollar spent now meant something solid. I stepped out and walked up the front path, my shoes crunching against fallen leaves. The porch creaked under my weight, familiar and welcoming. Inside, the air was still thick with the echoes of last night, the arguments, the accusations, the sudden silence after my words. But now, I could breathe in peace. I moved through each room slowly, touching the edges of things, the table where it all happened, the framed photographs on the wall, the couch with a small rip I never got around to fixing. These things were ordinary, yet they held years of memories, some painful, some precious. I sat on the couch and thought about my next steps. Matthew had told me the eviction notice could be formalized within 3 days if needed, but I hoped it wouldn't come to that. I didn't want legal battles or court hearings. I just wanted peace. As I made myself tea, my phone buzzed, a message from Tessa. It read, "We can talk about this, right? You don't really mean it." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I meant every word. It took her only a minute to respond. "You'll regret this, Charlotte." I didn't answer. I put the phone down and took a sip of tea, the taste strong and earthy. Regret was something I had lived with for too long. I wasn't giving it any more space. Later that evening, Carmen came over. We ordered takeout from a small diner down the street, burgers and fries that came wrapped in paper and tasted like freedom. She brought wine, a cheap bottle that cost maybe $12, and we sat in the living room, laughing about work and childhood memories. When she left, I walked her to the door. The night was cool, the moon sharp and clear. Across the street, porch lights flickered on, and I could hear the faint hum of a radio from a neighbor's garage. It was an ordinary night in America, but to me, it felt like the beginning of something entirely new. Before going to bed, I stood by the front window looking out at my yard. The grass needed trimming, the fence could use new paint, and the porch steps sagged a little on one side, all reminders of the work ahead. But I didn't mind. It was mine to fix now. I went to my room, the same one I had slept in as a teenager, but it felt transformed. I opened my jewelry box and took out the small silver ring I'd bought in Boston the year before, 45 pounds, a symbol of independence and quiet pride. I slipped it on my finger and smiled. It wasn't fancy, but it was me. Simple, solid, and earned. As I turned off the light, I whispered into the darkness. I did it. The words felt soft but strong, like a truth finally spoken aloud. And that night, I slept soundly in my house, under my roof, on my terms. They didn't take me seriously at first. I could see it in their eyes, that faint smirk people wear when they think they still have control. My father, Carl, leaned back in his chair like a man who'd already won. My mother, Judith, fluttered her hands, pretending to calm things down while secretly feeding the fire. And my sister, Tessa, laughed. Not nervously, no. She laughed like someone mocking a child. "Charlotte, you're being ridiculous," she said. "You can't just throw your family out." "Over what?" "Money." I didn't answer. I had already opened the hall closet and pulled out 3 cardboard boxes, the kind I used when I moved back home after losing my job in Philadelphia years ago. It felt strange, poetic almost, to be using them again. I placed them on the floor by the doorway and said simply, "Take what's yours." Carl frowned. "The house is the family's," he said. "It was," I replied. "But for 5 years, I paid for it. The paper says what it says." Tessa rolled her eyes. "You're so dramatic. You really think a piece of paper makes you the boss?" I looked at her, at the diamond ring on her finger that her fiancé, Evan, had probably bought on credit. I thought of the wedding budget she'd bragged about, $18,500, all for a ceremony that would likely last half a day and leave her buried in debt. "It doesn't make me the boss," I said. "It makes me the owner." That silenced her for a moment. Judith muttered something about ingratitude, but I didn't listen. I walked through the living room, opening drawers, setting things aside. A stack of mail that wasn't mine, magazines, random trinkets. Every step felt heavier than the last, but I kept going. By late afternoon, word had spread through the family grapevine. My cousin Olivia called from Buffalo, her voice low and cautious. "Are you really doing this, Charlotte?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply. "Good for you," she whispered. "They've leaned on you for too long." After that, my phone buzzed every hour, texts, missed calls, voicemails. Most of them were guilt trips dressed as concern. But one message from my coworker Lucas made me smile. "Proud of you. Need help?" It was evening when the tension thickened again. The house smelled like dust and leftover arguments. My parents sat at the kitchen table, whispering. Tessa was on the phone, crying to Evan, her voice rising and falling like a broken melody. I stayed in the living room, flipping through documents one last time, the deed, the bank statements, the payment confirmations. I didn't need to convince anyone anymore, but I wanted to see the proof again, to remind myself that I wasn't imagining my own power. At 10 o'clock, the shouting started. Carl's voice boomed first. "You're tearing this family apart." Judith followed, her tone trembling between anger and pleading. "We raised you, Charlotte. We gave you everything." I stood in the doorway, calm, almost detached. "You gave me a home to grow in," I said softly. "But I gave you one to live in, and I'm taking it back." The storm raged for nearly an hour. Words were thrown like stones, selfish, heartless, cold. I stood still through all of it. I had stood through worse before. Layoffs, betrayals, heartbreaks. This, at least, had an end I could see. At last, when their voices cracked and the house fell quiet again, I spoke the final line. "Midnight tomorrow," I said. "Please be gone by then." They looked at me, stunned. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I didn't slam doors or curse. I just turned and walked to my room. Behind me, Judith began to sob, soft and desperate, while Carl muttered curses under his breath. But I didn't look back. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But beneath that, I saw something else, clarity. The kind that only comes when you've finally stopped lying to yourself. For 5 years, I had been the quiet provider. I had worked extra shifts at the design studio, taken freelance projects on weekends, and skipped vacations. I had turned down dinners and holidays just to make sure the mortgage was paid. And all that time, they thought I was just helping. It almost made me laugh now. Around 11, There came a knock on my door. 3 soft taps. Charlotte. It was Judith. Her voice was small. Can we talk? I hesitated before opening the door. She stood there, her face blotchy from crying, her robe tied loosely at the waist. I'm sorry, she said immediately. I shouldn't have said those things. We were just scared. You know how families get. Carl appeared behind her, arms crossed, jaw tight. We didn't mean harm, he said. You just blindsided us. Tessa joined them a moment later, eyes red but dry. It's been stressful, with the wedding and everything. Maybe we said things we shouldn't have. I believed pieces of it. I really did. They weren't monsters. Just people who had mistaken my silence for weakness. I nodded slowly. I know, I said. But it doesn't change what needs to happen. Judith's lips trembled. You'd really make your own mother leave her home? I swallowed hard. It's my home, I said. And I need peace. You all had your chance to show me respect. That moment passed. Carl muttered something like, "This is madness," and turned away. Tessa stormed off down the hall. Judith lingered a few seconds longer, then whispered, "You'll regret this someday," before following them. When their footsteps faded, I closed the door quietly and leaned against it. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from finality. I had drawn a line that couldn't be erased. I sat by the window for a long time, watching the streetlights flicker over Cedar Court. The world outside was peaceful, couples walking their dogs, a car pulling into a driveway, the faint hum of someone's TV through the open window next door. Life went on, simple and ordinary. Mine was just beginning to feel that way again. I thought about the years ahead, about mornings where I'd drink coffee alone without feeling judged, about weekends where the house would be filled with laughter I invited, not tension I tolerated. I thought about painting the living room blue, about maybe getting a cat. I thought about what freedom really meant, not running away, but standing your ground. Before bed, I checked my phone. No new messages. The silence was almost comforting. As I turned off the lamp, I whispered into the darkness, "One more day." And for the first time in a long while, I slept deeply. Not because I was tired, but because I finally believed the house would soon be quiet again. By the next night, the boxes were filled. The living room looked bare, as if the house itself had already begun to forget them. Judith folded her sweaters carefully, even the ones she hadn't worn in years. Carl paced back and forth, grumbling under his breath, refusing to look at me. Tessa sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, her jaw set tight. Outside, a taxi idled by the curb. The driver waited patiently, his meter ticking in quiet red numbers. The street was empty except for the soft yellow glow of the streetlight over the corner mailbox. I stood by the front door, holding it open, the night air spilling inside. Judith approached first. Her eyes were swollen, red from crying. She stopped in front of me, hesitated, then leaned forward and kissed my cheek. "Good night," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I hope someday you understand." "I do," I said softly. "That's why I'm doing this." Carl followed, a single duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He didn't hug me. He just extended his hand. The gesture felt oddly formal, almost like two strangers concluding a business deal. His grip was firm but brief. "Take care of yourself," he muttered, and then he walked out without looking back. Tessa came last. She didn't speak. She just lifted her suitcase, her engagement ring flashing under the porch light. For a moment, I thought she might turn around and say something cruel or maybe even kind. But she didn't. She just walked past me and climbed into the taxi. "Good night," I said quietly. "I wish you peace." The driver nodded politely and closed the trunk. The taxi rolled away down Cedar Court, its taillights glowing like two small embers until they disappeared at the end of the street. The sound faded. The silence that followed was complete. I closed the door. It didn't slam. It just clicked shut, light and final. The house seemed to exhale, as if it, too, had been waiting for this moment. I stood there for a long time, hand resting on the knob, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the clock in the hall, and the faraway song of a passing train. I walked from room to room, touching things gently, as if reacquainting myself with an old friend. The kitchen counters were cool beneath my palms, smooth stone I had chosen from a warehouse sale for $2,300 3 summers ago. The living room walls still smelled faintly of paint from when I redid them in the soft color I'd found in a magazine, morning sand. The small water stain on the ceiling would need covering soon, but I didn't mind. On Saturday, I'd paint it over. On Sunday, maybe I'd buy fresh flowers. When I reached the dining table, the same table where it had all fallen apart, I stopped. A single mug sat there, half full of cold tea. I picked it up, poured the contents into the sink, and washed it clean. It was such a small act, yet it felt sacred. A new beginning always starts with something ordinary. The mail sat on the counter. I opened it methodically, sorting each piece into piles. Most of it was junk, but one letter caught my attention, a flyer for a job fair in Cleveland, and beneath it, a postcard from Carmen. The postcard showed the Portland coastline, cliffs rising above blue water. On the back, she had written in her quick, looping script, "We should plan a cheap trip next spring. Maybe drive up the coast. Or better yet, save for a summer in Europe. I'll bring the maps, you bring the courage." I smiled. I could choose now. Every dollar I earned, every hour I spent, would belong to me alone. I made myself a fresh cup of tea, the kind with honey and mint, and sat by the window as rain began to tap softly against the glass. The street outside shimmered in silver light. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and a car door closed. Life went on. I pulled out a yellow notepad and began to write. Not plans, not dreams, just a list. Fix the stain. Plant herbs by the back steps. Start a savings fund. $250 each paycheck. Learn to ride a bike again. Invite good people over. No yelling. When I finished, I tore the page from the pad and taped it to the fridge. For once, my future looked simple. Not grand or wild, just steady. And that steadiness felt like freedom. That night, I opened the windows and let the cool air in. The curtains fluttered gently, the house breathing with me. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of the rain. I thought of everything that had led here, the years of silence, the long hours at work, the arguments that blurred into noise. It all seemed far away now, like a storm that had passed. I dreamed of a bright train rolling across an open landscape, fields spreading out on both sides, sky wide and blue. I dreamed of small coins in my palm, of fair work and clear words, of laughter at a table that belonged only to me. When morning came, sunlight spilled across the floorboards in long, golden lines. The house was quiet, but not empty. It was alive.
Mine.
I stood in the doorway and looked around, the chairs neatly pushed in, the sunlight glinting on the framed photo of me and Carmen from our last summer trip, the vase of fake tulips on the counter. I smiled and said softly to the empty rooms, "Thank you." Then, with a steadier voice, I said to myself, "Go on." I locked the door behind me and stepped out into the morning air. The neighborhood was waking, a child's laughter, a delivery truck rumbling down the street, the faint smell of coffee from a neighbor's kitchen. I walked down Cedar Court, light as a dollar bill in the wind, ready to buy my own days.